Hello and welcome back to our Cock Rages On, or
As we actually ended up with out of cowardice. No, it's actually a great name. Great and unfortunate things. Our Spartacus fan cast
yes,
back on
back on track.
episode. Yeah, back on episode 2.
Yes, and actually the name, because I was saying last episode that we couldn't figure out what it was going to be, but it's a line that Spartacus's wife says in the first episode, and we felt like it pretty accurately described what the show was going to be and what our podcast was going to be discussing.
Yeah, it is one of those like thesis statement in episode 1 type
Truly,
of
there
deals.
are a lot of great and unfortunate things about the show. But yeah, welcome back. My name is Tuisku,
And I'm Eppu.
and we're a couple, and we're making a Spartacus podcast that you're listening to. In the last episode, we talked about the first episode of Spartacus, and we also talked about production details, kind of like the time and place in media landscape that the Stars TV show Spartacus started in, and we also talked about a little bit about the history of the actual historical Spartacus and the historical period where his revolt happened and what the context of it was. And yeah, anything you want to say about the first episode?
No, I had a good time, and I've seen rave reviews in my DMs.
Oh my god, we have 3 likes on YouTube. Really making it happen over here. But you know we're in it for the love of the game, not for the fame and glory. So we're going to stay true and not be tempted by advertisers, though they're already
Knocking
clamoring.
on our doors. They
Truly.
want us to go in the discourse arena, the current gladiatorial games. They want us to diss the earlier Spartacus fan cast. They want us to discuss how Stars is a rotten corporation. They just want beef.
Exactly.
They want beef.
And I was gonna say that we're gonna have to start selling mattresses on here, but I feel like that's a dated reference. I don't think anybody's podcast
Yeah,
is selling
I-
mattresses anymore.
I think we need to start selling mental illness. That's
No, it's the BetterHelp sponsorship that's
exactly.
happening.
Yeah. But before we get too far into the gladiatorial weeds here, I think we should open up with the synopsis of the episodes.
Yeah. So in the first episode, we get Spartacus's backstory. He is taken away from Thrace. His wife is taken from him. He is put to the arena to die with other convicts, and instead of dying, he defeats all the gladiators that were supposed to kill him. And the Roman general who put him there is very annoyed by this, but the crowd wants to see him live, and so a local lanista, a man who owns a gladiator school, buys him and makes him one of his gladiators. And that is where we start episode 2. Spartacus is at this gladiator school.
Aludus.
Aludus, which is the official term, and it is owned by Gladiators.
Sort of Hogwarts type situation.
Shut up. Yeah, yeah, so he's at the Ludus, and the first of we're going to be talking about 2 episodes, so episode 2 and episode 3. I did say in the last episode that we're going to talk about episodes 2, 3, and 4, but unfortunately we have too much to say after episodes 2 and 3, and it wouldn't make sense for us to do all 3 because we are yappers, and we love to yap, and truly there's like so much material already at this point. So in episode 2 we get to see kind of the Ludus, and this is a really key location, especially for the first season and the prequel season. We're gonna be spending a lot of time here, so I think most of what episode 2 does is that we get established, like the place is established and the characters are established, and the character dynamics are established. Not a lot of plot happens in the first episode.
No. That is not true. We immediately start. Like I think you're like doing a little bit too much of an over intellectualization here. We
Rude.
start with fucking Spartacus getting his dick wet and his wife getting murdered, and we get immediate Jesus imagery, and minute one we are in it.
Yeah, that's true. That's not the plot of the story.
Yes, it is.
It's vibes. So in the first, like I said, that's establishing what this whole show is going to be about. But like overall, if we're doing an overview, not a lot of plot happens. Spartacus gets to meet a bunch of the characters that exist in this space. Two of the people who are historical, rest who are not, and then he also starts training with the gladiators, and he sees Glauber again. Glauber tells him that like his wife has been captured elsewhere and kind of taunts him about this. Spartacus makes a deal with Bariatus, who owns the Ludus, that if he is a really good gladiator, Bariatus is going to try and find his wife for him, which
truly one of the wife guys of all time.
Spartacus, not Bariatus.
Well,
also kind of a wife guy.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's true.
It's a show full of wife guys.
It really is, and I will come back to this. That it is. I have a note here that says it's a show full of wife guys. So we are going to come back to that point later. But yeah, so for Bariatus, we get to know what his deal is and what his wife's deal is. They've been living in this place for a long time. It's his grandfather's Ludus, but they're struggling financially and they're trying to make ends meet while maintaining this upper class Roman facade at the same time. And then by the end of the second episode, Spartacus has known a couple of people, made some enemies, and but wins a duel that grants him to kind of be part of the Ludus for real. He was in like a little trial period at first, and then he gets branded a real gladiator, and he takes the gladiatorial vow. And then in the third episode, we get to see his first games, and we get to a little bit more of the actual plot starts happening. Characters start kind of moving forward in their stories instead of just being established. So we get a little bit more about Crixus, who's one of the other main characters here. Spartacus becomes his enemy in the first episode, in the Ludus, second episode, and then in this one, their enemy relationship kind of becomes even bigger. Like they dislike each other more and more. And by the end of the episode, Spartacus' arc is kind of about like learning that he actually isn't undefeated. He has to know when to quit and know that he can't like just fight his way out of it. He has to be strategic. He has to make alliances. He has to know when he's beat and to ask for mercy, which is very hard for him because he's a very stubborn man, I guess, when we get to know him. So
essentially, in current terms, he gets his own humiliation ritual, the episode.
Yeah, and we get to know, again, a little bit more about all the other characters and their backstories. We get to know the backstories of a lot of the people, the major people in this episode. We will go back to all of these characters and things in their own sections, but we kind of wanted to do a little overview at first. And then also in the second episode, we get a little bit more about the villain dynamics. There's also Glauber's wife, Ilithia, has kind of this antagonistic friendship with Bariatus' wife, Lucretia, and that relationship and kind of the jealousy and toxic Yuri situation that they have going on.
Two of the biggest fujoshis in all of Rome having a very intense, I'm not a lesbo, but relationship with each other.
Yeah, it's very
Mean Girls.
It's very like kind of sexually ambiguous Roman Mean Girls situation, which is wonderful. But we get more into that as well. And that is a theme that's also like, or a plot point that is going to be very important in later episodes and for everything else. But that's around like all the big plot stuff that happens. And so for the rest of the episode, we're going to kind of go plot point by plot point, or maybe topic by topic of like what we want to discuss. I think we were thinking that it would also make sense to kind of hear, before we go into the weeds, do a little bit of triggers
Yes.
What is it called?
Trigger warnings,
Yes.
content warnings. So I think if you heard episode 1 and if you've been listening intently, you might have seen these coming. So the big ones are sex and violence and sexual violence.
Yeah.
And especially sexual violence will be a big point of conversation in this episode.
Yes.
And going forward, it will only get bigger and bigger until a certain point.
Yeah.
So if that's something that you find difficult to deal with, I would most definitely just skip this episode. It will probably be at least slightly triggering.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. The topics, as much as we like to laugh and make fun of the show, it also, kind of what we said in the first episode, is very serious and weighty at times. And we want to talk about the serious topics with the weight that they deserve, and we want you guys to take care of each other and to take care of yourselves. So if you're really triggered by topics of sexual assault, this might not be your episode.
or your podcast.
Or your podcast, or your TV series. Unfortunately, Spartacus is full of extremely triggering topics, and again, not always handled with a lot of sensitivity. Though I will say about the things that we're going to discuss today, I think are handled pretty well in the actual episode itself. But yeah, without further ado, that was quite a lot of ado, I feel like. But without further ado, what would be the first thing that you'd want to discuss about these two episodes?
So I think, as a person who's really into aesthetics, I would like to leave that for later. A little switch up rule.
Yeah.
I really want to discuss the themes because I think at this point we're already really digging into what's going to happen in the series and what are the sort of pressures and societal ills that are going to be leading into the series going forward. And if I may open up with one major theme that I really noticed in this episode, in these two episodes, is instrumentalization of other people, like using them to do something. The clearest and most direct is, of course, being a person who owns other people.
Yes.
For sure. And it is so clear that it doesn't even really it's not worth mentioning because it's so obvious.
Yeah.
But the ways it's really sort of expounded upon in these very sort of subtle ways and in some non-subtle ways is very interesting to me. Like in episode 2, there's a conversation where Batiatus and Lucretia are discussing their political scheming, and it's sort of like this lead up to a sex scene. And when Batiatus makes a case for how he's going to play this situation off, there's no losing situation for him here, he's going to win no matter what, Lucretia gets excited and takes the hand of one of her slaves and put it to her crotch to start sort of stimulating her sexually. And in episode 3, a similar situation is reflected when Batiatus is taking a piss and he's using one of the slave's hands to hold his dick.
Yeah.
I feel that mirroring is it's one of the subtler moments in both cases, but it's really showing how these people are viewing other people in their lives as objects, as sort of these stepping stones to whatever sort of goal they're trying to use, be it sexual satisfaction, laziness, politics, whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's both reflective of all of these enslaved people's historical position as slaves, the power that the master had over slaves was absolute in Roman times. So the way that they're behaving with these people would not have been uncommon or even particularly aggressive or humiliating compared to all the things that they could have been doing. But so it is historically accurate, unfortunately, but also it does tell you so much about who these two people are as characters. But Badiadus and Lucretia especially view other people as tools and objects to be used. Though that is true also, especially for Ilithia, who is involved in all of that. I do think this is a case of, this is not a show where there's a lot of Roman good guys. I think there's not really a very... I don't want to say nuanced as in there should be a nuanced discussion about this. I don't necessarily think that's true, but the show makes a very strong case about how the free Romans, the people who own these enslaved people, just are presented as abusers, and like you were saying, they use people in explicit and aggressive but also really mundane and dirty and uncomfortable ways, just really casually. Their ownership of these people is so absolute to them that they don't even think about it.
Oh yeah, and there's so many lines in this episode that are very directly going for that. You have Spartacus saying that Bariadus asks him, I think it was Bariadus, could have been someone else, they ask him, why are you here? Why are you in this ludus?
Yeah, that's Badiadus.
Yeah, and Spartacus says, because I trusted the honor of a Roman.
Yeah.
Very much being fuck you Romans. But then there's a discussion Spartacus has with his blonde-haired friend whose name
his name is Varro.
Yeah, he's discussing things with Varro, and he says that Roman way of life is turning men into coins, again reflecting on that objectification of human lives. But I would sort of it is very clear that you're supposed to view the Romans as the bad guys.
Yes.
It is almost comically direct. But at the same time, I think one of the strengths of Spartacus as a show, and it's already coming in at this early of a stage, is that all of the bad guys are very compelling as their own people. It's not as clear here yet, but Bariadus and Ilithia and Glauber and Lucretia are going to get their spotlight, where they are going to be a sympathetic character. They're very charismatic, very
it's true.
They draw you in.
Yeah, I think one of the things that whenever I've talked to people about this show that I keep bringing up is that it has this way of making you hate a character, and then the show turns it around, and then you suddenly sympathize the character, or sympathize with the character, and then you hate them again. And it has this really incredible power of really using your empathy as a tool to make you in turn root and despise these people. You really see, even though what I was saying about Romans being villainous, they still feel deeply human. These characters and their motivations, everybody's so deeply motivated, sometimes by petty things, sometimes by really legitimate fears, and it makes them do bad things, and it makes you hate them at the same time. There's not a villainous character here who is so villainous you don't understand them, or they come across as cartoonish, at least to me. Everybody feels really grounded. Though I will say one thing is that, you brought up Varro, and he's a good example of kind of the only exception to this, is that Varro is one of Spartacus's new and arguably his only friend at this point in the story. He's another new recruit in the gladiator school, and he's a free man who volunteered to become a gladiator. And in the show, it's the reason that he's given is that he seems to have an alcohol problem that has landed him deep in debt, and he has to try to pay for his debt somehow, and that's why he's chosen to become a gladiator. And that's actually, it's a very interesting character trait, because again, he's not based on any particular historical figure. Only Spartacus, Crixus, and Oenomaus are, and Bariadus. But his the person, the character type did again exist in history. You had free men who became gladiators. Sometimes the reasons, a lot of them were lower classes, but I've also learned today that a lot of them were upper classes too. And the reason for this was that the gladiators had this really unique place in Roman society, which I will get into more a little bit later. But yes, Varro is a very key character that comes up in these two episodes.
I think that note of like being in debt is also very important when we're
Yes.
discussing the sort of like how Bariatus works as the sort of figure who's trying to hold on to power, which most definitely sort of psychologically drives him to be this like person who's using other people very haphazardly. Is that he also is in debt. Like
Yes.
I think it was in episode 2, there's a moment when someone comes to collect his debts.
Yeah.
And he's doing some fucking uncut gem shit like, yes, of course, I'll pay you 20% more after the games when I win big cash. Oh, yes, of course. And it's like this, like even the people who are in like power, like who are in powerful positions are screwed themselves in
Yeah.
some way because the system they are living in is fundamentally predatory.
Yes, and I think that that's a really good point, that the debt thing and kind of these ties that we have to each other is a huge plot point in the series that keeps coming up again and again. And I think it's part of, again, what makes it so watchable is that, like, you don't necessarily like Bariatus, but the actor has a lot of charisma, as does the actor who plays Lucretia. She's great. Lucy Lawless. Again, I can't believe that even though we talked about it in the last episode, we were watching the episode 2, and you were like, that lady's pretty hot. I'm like, yeah, that's Xena. And you were like, what? And I was like, we literally talked about it in the last episode.
I just have a bad memory. I'm always spacing out.
But yeah, no, they have a lot of, I think, again, Bariatus, Lucretia, they have a lot of charisma, and you don't like them, but you want to see more of them. And once you get to this plot point about the money, that's also something that, like, really, like, you can't help but feel for them. Like, in the 3rd episode, there's a plot point where Lucretia's buying jewelry, even though she doesn't really have the money to do it. And she's trying to buy this emerald necklace to impress Ilithia, who's a more upper class woman than she is. And Ilithia essentially just very, again, mean girl style, like, shoots her down, like, oh, that was last year's emeralds or whatever. But you can't help but feel a little bit for her. Like, there's a tinge in your soul that, like, you feel when that happens. And again, with Lucretia, there's another part where Ilithia is talking about how kind of, like, she's seeing the gladiators in the ludus, and she's like, oh my god, do you let your children play with them? And like, Lucretia, who's an older woman, has to, like, kind of stop and say that she doesn't have children yet. And there's this really awkward, painful moment between them where, again, Ilithia is clearly, like, kind of taken aback and also a little bit, like, they're both a little bit embarrassed for it. And again, you don't have a reason to like them. You don't like them, but there's like a twinge, at least for me, that you feel for her in, like, that moment.
Oh yeah. Like, that scene itself, like, specifically has this moment when she's, like, watching the necklaces. One of her slave girls is doing modeling, and she's just essentially like a showpiece. Like, she's just standing there as a inanimate object, and she then sexually humiliates her by disrobing her while she's doing the necklace.
Yeah.
Like very, like, sort of, haphazardly. Again, like, being like, oh, you're wearing too much. Show me your tits. Oh, what a nice necklace. I will buy it to impress my girl. It is...
Yeah, and I
think... It is fascinating because it's constantly undercutting how much you're supposed to like these Roman people and be invested in their lives.
Yeah, the show does remind you all the time that these are terrible people, but it also is like, oh, you feel for them, but fuck you, they're bad. And I like that. That's a tension that I really enjoy. And also, I think the jewelry scene is important because it is contrasted with what happens with the jewelry later with Crixus and the same character. So talk a little bit more about the other characters that are key here. I think is a good moment to do that now. So we are introduced really to Crixus, who's maybe like the gladiator in this Ludus. He's like the hot shot, previous winner of everything. He's like the cool leader guy. And he is a Gaul, and he does not like Spartacus, and Spartacus does not like him. And again, Crixus is a historical figure. He's one of the only ones that we actually have like a historical basis for. But in this show, he's presented as kind of like the hero champion of Capua. Like, he has this popular role. And then for the other main characters there's Barca, who is another like famous, powerful gladiator in the school, not as key as Crixus, but still comes up a lot.
Sort of a tactical kind of gladiator.
Yeah. There's a
Sorry.
he wears this really stupid clothing thing. I want to talk about the clothes later, but he looks dumb as fuck. And then there's Varro, who's like the other recruit. He's the Roman volunteer, Spartacus's friend. There's a bunch of side characters. There's Gladiator and his wife, Elithia and Glauber. We're introduced to them properly. And then there's also Asher, who is kind of a worm. And he's one of the more, again, like, interesting villains. So when I said earlier that his show, a lot of the Roman characters, that there's very few good Roman characters, well, not all of the gladiator characters are good in comparison. Asher is a great example. We don't really get to know him that well yet. He's kind of more a side character. He seems to have some sort of an injury, and he doesn't really do gladiator fighting anymore, but he's kind of their bets guy, and he does little errands out of the house mostly, which again, that's a historical thing that would have happened. And then another key character is we have Onomaeus, who's their doctore, or the an old gladiator who's teaching the younger gladiators. And again, Onomaeus is a real historical character, or based on a real historical character. And the role of a doctore is pretty accurately portrayed. You had older, kind of retired gladiators who would become trainers for the younger gladiators.
I would really want to stop just a little bit on Onomaeus, because I think they're really sort of ramping up him as an important character, and he will be.
Yeah.
It's pretty obvious. But I think as far as the sort of slave narrative, goes, I think Onomaeus is one of those moments where I'm unsure how much they really sort of were in it for ideological reasons. Like, I think...
You mean his character?
No, I mean just visually. Not even as a character. Because, like, when you have a story about slavery, essentially, having the one main black guy be the guy with the whip, who, like, very empathetically is constantly whipping. Like, it's every time he has a cool line, he does like a slow motion cracking of the whip.
This is true. Yeah.
Very pointed imagery in my, like...
It is. I had not considered that. That's a really good point. I think, like, again, sorry for being this guy, but historically accurately, there would have been black people and black enslaved people in Rome. So I was thinking about it from this very kind of narrow historical view, but that's a point. It is a good point that he's the only like key black character. Actually, that's not true, because the girl, that's a black actress who plays the girl that Crixus has a crush on, whose character name we have not learned, because I would have written it down. I've been waiting for it for like 3 episodes, and it still hasn't been said. And I have forgotten what her name is, but I don't want to say it yet. But like, I haven't wanted to Google it because I'm waiting to see when the show says what her name is. But yeah, so there's also, side note, there's also her character. So she's kind of the personal slave of Ilithia, and she lives in the house separated from the gladiators. But she became more of a central character in the third episode as well.
Yeah, and I would like to also stop on her for just a little bit because I find it very interesting that sort of Crixus as a character. I'm going to use Crixus to sort of get to her.
Yeah,
Crixus.
That's what the show does.
Yeah. So Crixus as a character, as stated, is this champion of Capua. He's the big shot of the Ludus, and that's why sort of Spartacus starts to beef with him, because he thinks he's the hot shit and like a natural talent. He's been to war, and he's alpha kind of broing Crixus.
Well, he's kind of also just like refusing to play the game, in the way like he doesn't respect the institution of like the Ludus. He doesn't respect the games. He doesn't have this identity as a gladiator, and that is really what like causes a lot of the conflict between him and the other characters. That's what causes the conflict between him, like Spartacus and Oenomaus, and then Spartacus and Crixus, is that Spartacus fundamentally doesn't respect what they are,
and even Spartacus and Varro.
Yeah, and even but like they're friends, but like with Spartacus just kind of comes in here. Everybody else has this idea of like what the gladiators are and what the place of the Ludus is, as this kind of grand, beautiful, bigger than life kind of thing. Gladiator is actually also trying to sell it to Spartacus. In the end of the second episode, when he's making a deal with him, he kind of gives this pitch about gladiators, where he was like, my grandfather who made this Ludus believed that no people were without worth, and like even slaves had worth, and this is the way to prove your worth is through gladiator like matches. And Crixus and Oenomaus clearly believe it. So much of their identity is based on that. So Spartacus not respecting that is not just him being a hotshot and him believing that he's better than them, though that's also there. It's also the fact that he's rejecting this whole thing that they've built their whole identity on. And I think that's what, like, he's the only one who's doing that level of disrespect to them. And that's why he's dropping them up the wall.
Yeah. And Crixus as this sort of venerated hero of the Ludus, venerated hero of the city. He even has a backstory where he fights orcs. Again, orcs with fucking dreadlocks.
No, that's Barca who fought the orcs with dreadlocks.
Was it?
Yeah. Hold on.
I'm pretty sure it was Crixus.
Wait.
Because that was bigging him up, because Spartacus is going to fight Crixus. It is Crixus.
Yeah, it is Crixus. Sorry, I thought it was Barca, because we got so many people's backstories in the last episode.
Yeah, okay. So, anyways, Crixus has this like legendary backstory where he went against these two brothers who are unkillable, and yet he did it, and they're again very racist stereotypes, like half human, half animals. There's a very interesting line from Varro, I think, who says that they're the sons of a whore raped by jackal, which I think is an Omen reference. Maybe.
Maybe.
It's just such a specific combination that I have to believe it's an Omen reference anyways. And as this sort of like person in the system, Crixus is both used because, you know, of course, like as a gladiator, but he's also who's the name of that?
Lucretia?
Lucretia, yeah. He's being used as Lucretia's personal sort of sex worker. Like, she's most definitely using him to satiate her sexual desires. But Crixus himself is kind of like half-heartedly into it. And as soon as he finds that he has this crush on this girl, He approaches her with this sort of swagger of a person who's owed this sort of, relationship. And the most alarming line in all of these episodes is Crix is saying that the girl just came to bloom.
Okay, well, it was awkward, but I that's interesting that you read it that way because I did not read him as being predatory towards her. I think that the really like his relationship maybe at the beginning, but even then I didn't read it that way because like I think it's very interesting how his relationship with her is juxtaposed with his relationships with Lucretia. Well, relationships kind of like in quotation marks, Lucretia's abusing him. But basically, he is kind of, I guess, like resigned to this role that he has with Lucretia. And then he sees this woman that he actually develops like independent feelings for. And their whole thing is he's very tender with her. Like, he's very sweet and kind of gentle and cautious with her. Like every time she kind of is nervous and backs away, he does not try to like go after her, and instead he like kind of tries to reassure her that he's not trying to harm her. And like he, like what I was saying about the jewelry thing, he ends up buying the jewelry that she'd clearly liked the best, that like Lucretia had been trying on her, I guess. And he'd seen that, and he ends up buying that jewelry piece for her. And to spoil a little bit of the plot, they end up becoming a couple that like lasts for the rest of the show. And I think like the beginnings of that relationship, I think they're really stark contrast to the other relationships that are happening like to Crixus and around him at that point. But this is where I kind of want to talk about, take this sort of his relationship with Lucretia and do now my little like Gladiator historical tangent.
Yeah, for
here.
sure.
Because kind of like what I mentioned in the last episode, gladiators were very like famous and popular, and in a way that is kind of hard to compare to anything else before like modern day celebrity. They were there's an archaeological find from Pompeii where there's a children's like a bottle for a baby that has a gladiator emblem for a specific gladiator on it.
Holy shit.
Yeah, so it was so popular. You had the games when they happened; they would last the whole day. You had merch. You had like vases for these specific fights. It was like thousands of people would come to watch these games. And gladiators were making, if I'm not going to remember the specific number, but like 18 times the wage of a soldier in one battle. Like a year's wage of a soldier in one battle. So
Holy fuck.
they were celebrities, like in a way that like truly did not exist anywhere else. And it put these people in a really interesting social position because Rome, like I said, loved them. They were so popular. And at the same time, Roman society also considered artists and performers extremely low class. Like, they weren't, even if they hadn't been slaves, though most of them were, they wouldn't have been allowed to vote in anything because they were considered so low class.
That's sort of like reflective of how we also kind of think of artists these days. Because like it is sort of like just a reflection of the sort of hunger artist type of deal.
Yeah, and also, well, I think another good example, and everybody's made this connection, but is the UFC and WWE. Like, those are very directly the modern version of that, especially the UFC, especially as it started there was a funny side tangent about how John Milius, who did Conan the Barbarian, and he also produced Rome, the TV series, and has been talking about a lot of this like gladiatorial history, similar topics. And he was one of the first producers on UFC when it started.
Oh my god.
Yeah.
This like the synchronicities going on here. Like I hadn't even considered this. But this feels like two tectonic plates just like clicking to place like puzzle pieces.
Yeah.
Like this is insane.
And I think another thing that like a little bit of a misconception that the show kind of does also is that the point of gladiators wasn't to kill them as such. Like there was always the danger of death, but the idea of gladiatorial combat was not as much that one of them was always going to die. Usually one of them was going to live. The deaths were not that common. And that there's a couple of things that are getting conflated here because the games were more than just the gladiatorial combat. You had the gladiators were kind of like the prize game at the end of the session. They happened in the afternoon. They were the thing that everybody was waiting for. You had all the, like, people were coming there, buying their little merch, their little baby bottles of their favorite gladiators. But before that, there was a bunch of other things. And the other things included usually a lot more death. So you had, I forget the terms, I'm not a Roman historian, forgive me, but you had this little snippet or like a little game where you would bring wild animals to the stage and you had professional hunters who would hunt them for sport. And this was not the idea that they were fighting with the animals on any kind of even ground. There was just kind of show of talent and a show of like all these exotic animals in the Roman Empire. And the Colosseum at some point had so many like pulleys and levers and things that they could bring trees and like rocks and things to create like a jungle that they could like hunt in. Like this was crazy. Like
the production value of these is because like whenever you see like Colosseum in movies and stuff, it's always just a barren
sand. Yeah. You know, there were trees and levers and pulleys and all this. There was like there's a crazy system under the Colosseum that they built to do these kind of crazy stunts and like things that would come up and go down and like.
Honestly, this is really making me want to go back in time to see this. Like I've always been like I've seen my fair share of like people die on camera. Like that can be like any more exciting. But like this is
it is crazy.
Sort of selling me on it.
Well, horrible thought. I that's not my goal. I will say that there's like this was pretty much animal cruelty, the hunting part, obviously, and there was like some like areas. I forget who it was. Some sort of a Roman important person who was like, we've all hunted all the leopards from this area and we can't do this stuff anymore. So they were like really doing leopard extinction through games at the time. Like it was crazy.
That's truly the worst side, like supply side.
But this was completely separate from the gladiators. These hunters were not gladiators. They were like professionals in their own field, but they were not gladiators. And some of them did die, but that was not the point. The point was to hunt animals. Obviously, the danger of death was always like one of the appeals there, but it was not the main goal. Then you had the parts that were really bloody, so you had executions. And these executions could have been like stage fights. Romans were staging historical battles. So you had like they forced prisoners, either war prisoners or religious prisoners or any kind of prisoners. They would force them to reenact historical battle scenes, for example, and kill each other. They did naval battles like this. At the beginning of it, before this pulley and lever system was invented, you could fill the Colosseum with water, and they had staged naval battles. for convicts, that they and these again, like if they survived, they largely were killed because these were executions. And then and you had different ways of doing this. Some people were immolated. Classically, this is again, if you've read your Bible, if you read Christian history, a lot of people were thrown to the animals to be killed, and that was different from the hunting part. So you had beasts they were, hadn't been fed, and you threw convicts or other prisoners to these beasts to be killed, or you had elephants that would maul them and other great things. And then I think the worst one that I learned about when researching this episode was that you had snuff plays. So you had these like acted plays where Romans would do little reenactments of like classical mythology, of like Roman religious mythology, where they would, the only example I'm going to give, because these are genuinely like too gruesome to talk about in this podcast, I feel like, was, for example, in the myth of Orpheus, there's one of the lines is that he played so beautifully that all the beasts and animals in the forest would they would be in a trance and they wouldn't hurt him. So they would put a convict, they would dress him as Orpheus, they would give him a lute, throw him in the middle of beasts and go, play, see if you can, And these were like big jokes, and people would watch these snuff plays while eating lunch.
I'm so curious what their moral panics were at the time. Like, if this was big entertainment, what sort of like, oh, you're showing too much angle. Like
there was a moral panic about the game.
Of course.
So you had a lot of the big time philosophers. I think Seneca. I'm talking out of my ass. I don't remember these guys' names, but a lot of the philosophers kind of considered these lowbrow, low class, very bad, because the games were incredibly popular, but not just among the Roman elites, but they were also popular among Roman lower classes, especially popular among Roman lower classes. And this is something that often is kind of, when you're writing about in movies and TV shows, you're often presenting rich evil Romans. But so many of the people who were watching these games were working class Romans. And part of the reason for that...
Fuck them too.
Yeah, absolutely. But also, they had free food. They had free drinks. They had a whole day of entertainment you could not get in your other life. So, like the bread and wine and games thing, they got free food. Like that was, and this was a major political tool. So even guys like Nero and Caligula, who are remembered as particularly evil and horrendous in our time, were very popular among like the lower classes in Rome because they had a lot of games, and these games were like really. This was the way to the people's hearts, was to fund games.
My brain is going like a million hours thinking about like modern day bread lines. They're like, hey, just before you get this loaf of baguette, you gotta see this fucking fucked up thing, and they put on like 2 psychos and a pickaxe, like.
Yeah, but that's the thing, is that people, like, again, and I was telling about the hunt before. The animals that were hunted were also, that meat was given to the poor. So it was a really
so
big, powerful.
Much more fucked up than I ever thought.
It is, and it's because like people have theorized that one of the reasons why there wasn't a major political revolt in Rome, despite the like massive inequality, was partially due to the games, how popular they were, how much they were used as a propaganda tool to keep the poor people in line and kind of like happy about their position, because you could be watching the same games as the Caesar was gonna be there, so you could be in the same place with Caesar with free bread and wine, looking at dudes kill each other.
Things were better back then, the old days, I guess.
But yeah, and so the executions and the bloodshed was really, again, like a political tool, a reminder of Rome's power and like how harshly you would be it was a punishment to the people who'd done the things, but it was also obviously deterrent to anybody to try to, it was a reminder of how vicious Rome was. And then the gladiators, again, they were like completely separate from this. They were professionals. They had been trained professionally. Usually, unlike in this TV show, they would have like a 2-year period of training before they even started. And they had a regiment where they would kind of do different type of trainings. You had lightweight training, you had resistance training, you had rest days. The gladiatorial season was every other season than the summer because the summers were too hot. So it was, but during the summers they bulked up and they kind of trained and rested and things. Again, very much like professional athletes. It's not. I don't think it's a 1-to-1. I was listening to a podcast called The Art of Manliness that was making a point about how much it's exactly like a modern day professional sports, and I'm like, it's not exactly like modern day professional sports.
I think this is someone signaling that, help me.
Yeah.
I need to get out of these circles. Like we don't know what sort of gladiatorial games the rich people are doing these days.
Yeah, I think this was a historian who was very like joking. Excited about the thing.
Or am I?
Yeah. Who knows? But I think it's kind of reductive to say it was exactly the same. And again, because the danger of death really was there and gladiators were killed, and you have historical, records of gladiators having to kill their friends and then mourning those friends. And it was absolutely a fucked up system. I think when a lot of the podcast again that I was listening to kind of ended up in this like really hype space about the gladiators, about how cool they were and how special they were and how trained they were and like how badass they were. And you're like, okay, again, like one of the podcasts that I listened to, a 2-parter History on Fire episode about it, and he was again talking about UFC, and he was like, consenting adults are supposed to be able to do whatever. I'm like, okay, let's remember something that's really key about this is that like gladiators were not largely consenting to this thing. Like again, I don't think we can, despite the fame, despite the money, despite the sexual power that gladiators hold, because again they were major sex symbols, and there's like a lot of like these historical funny anecdotes about that too. You can't claim that they were consenting to this when they weren't.
Just to synthesize a bit about the two subjects we've been on, I think one of the things that Spartacus as a show really brings forth in these 2 episodes is the parallel between being a gladiator and being a sex worker.
Yeah.
Especially on episode 3, there's a very stirring scene.
Oh, yeah.
Where Ilithia and Lucretia are enjoying this sort of pre-game like party, and they take Varro.
Yeah.
Essentially into a back room, and they have him have sex with an unconsenting slave girl.
And I mean, he's not consenting either.
Yeah, of course, yeah. And it is a very cruel scene when considered that the thing Varro is in there for is for his wife and family.
Yeah, and he says it during the scene. He's like, he brings it up like he's...
Very underlined, like, hey, this is extremely fucked up. And, like, they're having sex in this sort of... Like, on top of a table, there's a crowd around them, and Ilithia is completely, like, just bonked to the head, like, holy shit, this is the best shit of all time. And essentially, it's just, like, their version of pornography.
Yeah, and again, like, it's a horrifying scene. My notes just say evil, evil, evil a lot of the times, because there's also this music, like, the score, that's so... ominous and stressful. Like a lot of the sex scenes in the show are meant to be titillating, but that one is not. Like I think it's safe to say that it is presented like very disturbing and not sexy.
Yeah, and it's not really about the sex. It's mostly you have like maybe half of the screen is just like very shoddily composed like screwing, and then you have Ilithia going like, oh
Yeah,
my God.
it's about Ilithia and Ilithia's like character motivations, and again establishing how evil she is.
Maybe the most evil, like actually, like considered line of evil in this duology of episodes is when Ilithia sees Varro coming. She's like beaming with joy, and she goes, "Make him do it again."
Yeah, no, it's so evil.
Fucking hell, Jesus Christ.
Yeah, it's so scary, and truly, like the actor who plays Alithia she's so incredible because she's so funny and like charming, and then like turns a switch and is the scariest person you've ever seen.
And it is this sort of like she's scary because she's very sort of thoughtless and just wants to do whatever she's already doing. Like
Yeah.
she's not evil for some other purpose. She's just amusing herself,
Yeah,
essentially.
she's just like so uncaring of anybody else around her that she's not afraid to use them in the most horrifying ways.
And
For
she's
her
not
own gain.
strategizing at all.
No, not at this point, no. Again, this actually reflects, funnily enough, some of the moral panics that you were asking about earlier about Roman thing, because like the role of women in games was definitely a thing, because you had this, like one of the big fears like associated with gladiators was that, like, what are they doing to our women? Because they were like, gladiators were such a massive sex symbol, and like Roman upper class women, there's been at least one account of a Roman upper class woman like abandoning her whole life and posting everything to become wife of a gladiator. And this was obviously again like a huge like upset to the society. And so there was one emperor, I can't forget who, sorry all the Rome guys, I don't remember shit, but he basically
Fuck you too.
yeah, he made it so that only Vestal virgins were able to come and sit close in the games, and the Roman upper class women had to sit really far because he was really afraid they would get too into it. And like the stuff like that, and I think Ilithia kind of as this like Roman upper class woman who's so drawn to these like the animalistic appeal of these gladiators, as well as Lucretia, who's sexually abusing a gladiator in a very similar way.
But she's a lot more like it's normalized to her.
It's normal, yeah, but it's evil. But I think they're both representing again a very real historical aspect, and again because you kind of have to what again I found kind of funny listening to the podcast is that the sex part of this whole deal with gladiators was generally by these men whose podcasts I was listening to was kind of brushed off as like a perk, where like the way the show presents it is that like these relationships are not good for the men. Like even Crixus, who's kind of resigned again like to his role as essentially Lucretia's like lover, is clearly like he's basically disassociating at the point when we see it. At this point he doesn't even have a crush on this girl yet. Like he's talked to her once, but he's just like, it's not super overt, it's not like he's not making a face, but there's just this aura about him where you can like tell that he kind of has to remove himself like intellectually from the situation so he can survive it. And I think that's really interesting. I think a worse show would have maybe made it so that these men, again, like it's such a traditional idea of masculinity, especially in an environment that's this hyper masculine, that men want sex all the time. But both with Varro and with Crixus, like this sex that they're having with these hot Roman upper class women is clearly non-consensual and clearly traumatic to both of them.
I want to drop in just one little note on aesthetics on this one. When Crixus falls in bed with Lucretia, there's a match cut to another gladiator being caught in a net. Essentially, like in slow motion. It's like the same, like it's a match cut in movement.
Yeah.
So it really like emphasizes like this is
violence.
The same thing.
Yeah.
And he's getting caught in this net of, social power and all that. It is like, oh, man, I absolutely love how this show does these sorts of like parallels between these two
Yes,
things.
and I think it's so important again, and a thing that I think is often missing from the narrative, and the fact that they're like actually talking about it and bringing it up, I think is actually really like important and valuable, and again, unfortunately, extremely historically accurate.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
Um,
I think like it's the life as a gladiator. The show is not, like I said in the first episode, it's not the most historically accurate thing in the world. The ludus that they live in, they have it is still like around like what we know. They have a place to eat. They have essentially gym where they do weights and training. They have a doctor on board.
oh, I have to say one thing about the
Yeah.
gym. There's a goddamn they have this little fucking system where it's essentially like an alley they can run through with these spinning blades.
Yeah.
And it's fucking American Ninja
It
Warrior
is.
type shit so bad.
Yeah.
And I wrote in my notes, Bariadis Ludus is the fucking Capio Ninja Warrior.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that part's not historically accurate, but
What?
generally the life in the Ludus River, they're training and eating and just kind of living, and they have a doctor and everything, is pretty accurate. The life of a gladiator when he wasn't fighting, while not free, especially if you were enslaved, though interestingly, the ones who were free men were able to leave and then just come back like it was a day job. So Var is kind of treated as like one of the slaves, but historically, apparently, like free men were just kind of came there to work and then left, which I think is kind of funny, honestly.
That 9 to 5 kill machine.
Yeah.
But that's just kind of how things are.
Yeah.
You know, like that's how army works too.
But like the lifestyle or the living quality was a lot better than for poor Romans. So again, that was another reason for some people to enlist, is that the food was better, the doctor's care was better, and that's why again, like in the games, the goal wasn't necessarily to actually kill the gladiators as much as it was to just see these cool people fight. And here's another thing that I want to talk about is their stupid costumes. So here's my stupid costumes moment.
I have to say, this has been a delight to watch because, like, every time there's a new dumb piece of wardrobe, I get to see my lovely wife just absolutely losing.
Yeah, so basically, it's just, it makes no sense, man. Like, in the first episode, in the Ludus, they have these, like, leather Speedo things that look very much like they're from, like, the 300 or something, except they're all, like, customized to each of the characters. They have their own, like, trademark leather Speedos that have leather patches in different parts. And then Barca, like we mentioned earlier, he has this, like, what essentially looks like a gun belt, like one of those guns holster belt thing that's, like, he has, like, a little vest that he has that's just, like, straps in a belt
They're
buckle.
very, like, Roman tactical.
It makes no sense. It's so, like, modern for no reason. And then Spartacus has this, like, and I can't explain it. He has this, like, little black fringe that's just, like, that kind of, like a little cowboy fringe thing, except, like, it's really thin and long and, like, made out of black string, and it makes no sense, and it pissed me off every time I saw it.
And it doesn't look good either.
It doesn't look good. It doesn't look practical. You can barely see it because it's so thin, but it's still there, and it drives me fucking crazy. And then in the second episode, they were wearing these kind of more like linen-looking cloth panties, which is the more historically accurate version, because generally, like, gladiators, when they were fighting, I don't know what they would have looked like in the Ludus, but from all the historical information that we have, gladiators didn't really wear togas. They were fighting shirtless. Although there were different gladiator types, and they had different armor based on what types they were. Again, kind of with UFC, you had your different, like, categories of fighting, and then these guys would be pitted against each other to.
What was it similar to, like, weight? What was it, weight based, or
No,
just like how good they are?
Style based. So you had different styles of fighting. So you had the net guy, who had a trident and a net, and he was the only type that didn't have a helmet. And everybody else had a helmet, and then they had either a big shield and a sword, or then they had a small shield and a different kind of sword. And one of the looks is actually called a Thracian. They were like the original gladiator types were like Thracians and Gauls and something else I forget. And then they kind of became, they had these different kind of more fancier names. Though I think Thracian stayed Thracian. Though at that point, not everybody who were Thracians gladiators were Thracians. Like ethnically, it was just a style of fighting. But essentially, based on what we know, the theory is that the original styles came from like the local ways of fighting and local armor that these people would have worn.
So it essentially would have like instead of being like Thracian, you could imagine it more like Kung Fu versus judo type of situation.
Exactly.
Okay.
And then you had Murmillo, you had Renitarius, which was the guy with the net, and then you had Thracians, and you had a bunch of other ones. And there was a lot. By the end of it, there was like 7 or 12 or something. Like it became a bigger and bigger thing, and and then it was just like there were so many different styles. What I think is funny in that like the show. Actually, Spartacus is fighting in the Thracian style, and Crixus is fighting Murmillo, which used to be called the Gaul, which again he's a Gaul. So they've done like this historical research in that way as well. But yeah, so the reason why they aren't wearing like more clothing than that, one of the theories, or well, again, I'm calling this a theory because it's from the Art of Manliness podcast, and that guy, I did not trust that guy's vibe, but basically he said, and I do think this makes sense, is that they weren't wearing more clothing because if you were wearing clothing and you got cut and some of that fiber ended up in your cuts, that was a way to die very easily, because that a lot of like deaths in the past have come from infected wounds, and a lot of wounds got infected because you got fabric into them. So the idea that they weren't wearing that many clothes was because like they would get cut more safely without the wounds getting as infected as they would with clothing, which also speaks to the fact that the idea of a gladiator wasn't that they would always die. A gladiator was such a big investment to the games and to the ludus that they didn't really want them to die like that.
And there's of course the sort of show aspect to having someone, you know, be sexy and almost naked, and then getting to see the actual wound, you know. Like,
yeah, though again, like the big helmets kind of also came from the fact that they wanted to protect these people's heads.
Yeah.
Like they wanted to protect the investment. These were to a point star athletes.
Yeah.
Though again, there was much more of a danger. There was like one of the emperors, again, I don't remember who, specifically always wanted, every time there's a Renitarius who was the trident guy, I don't know if that's how you say the name, again, Rome people, I'm so sorry, but every time there's one of those fighters that would give up and ask for mercy, he would not give it because he loved seeing them die because they weren't wearing helmets. And it was the only type where you could see their face when they died.
Psycho shit.
Truly. But yeah, I think that like the show and the clothing in the show, again, surprisingly, I think gladiators are kind of a perfect fit for this type of like sexploitation show because of the fact that they were historically also shirtless. But I don't know what was going on with the fringe. I think the cloth pants in the 3rd episode looked a lot better and a lot less goofy.
They were experimenting.
Though I will say, it was very sad that in the 3rd episode, we did not get full frontal nudity in the full frontal nudity room the way we did in the first one. Because the first scene where Spartacus comes to the ludus in the 1st episode, like when he meets everybody.
In the 2nd episode.
Yeah, in the 2nd episode, when he meets everybody, it happens at this like a bath scene, and they had these sticks, which are called, hold on, sturgils, which was a common, like, kind of a tool that you use to kind of exfoliate and clean your skin.
Oh.
And they're using these, and everybody's naked, and we get this incredible like close up of Crixus's penis, like he's full frontal nude, and we're like really up close in there.
It's fucking all hogs on parade.
And then like for the whole scene, everybody's like posing, and they're oiled, and they're in this low lamplight with their dicks out, and it's just like it's homoerotic. It's so beautiful. And then in the third episode, when they were back in that room and they were washing with the Sturgills again, but they were wearing pants, and I was like, what happened to the full frontal nudity?
Yeah, it's literally like the show is so incredibly homoerotic all the time, and you get like even outside of the full hogs, you constantly get like these masculine, super fucking swole dudes just like make the most erotically suggestive little, ooh, I'm going to stab you right now, but the stabbing, I mean, dicking you down.
Well, I mean, Crixus's first line is,
Will lick my hole. The pig fucker's still alive.
Like it's like 2 minutes into the episode and he's on some gay shit.
and that's exactly when he's standing there. We've just seen a close-up of his penis, and he's like, well, lick my hole. The pig fucker is still alive. And I'm like, this is the best show on earth. Though
this is
I will
literally
say,
the lines in this. Oh,
I will say, before we say more about the lines, I was showing the second episode to two of my friends, you know who you are, and we were watching it on HBO Max, and they censored the dicks. Well, no, they didn't censor all of the dicks, but when we get, like, the close-up of the hog, they had, like, edited a dude in front of it.
what the hell?
I know!
Fucking-
It's an HBO, like, HBO is famous for, like, sexploitation shows, but they were like, close-up of Crixus's hog is too much for us.
Again, you could get Game of Thrones through the door, but whenever you embrace the power of Spartacus, they cower in front of it. Again, proving that Game of Thrones ain't shit. Spartacus is where it's at.
Absolutely.
Get them hogs.
Yeah, and
Also
about,
part of this show, clearly.
yes. And yeah, the homoeroticism is very present. It's also, like, in the, like, actual plot. The Barca is gay. It hasn't come up yet, truly, but he is, and it will come up later. And also, like I said, Ilithia and Lucretia have, like, a homoerotic situation happening between them. It's kind of played for laughs, but it also kind of isn't. So you it's kind of like, that's kind of their whole relationship, is that you don't really know. They don't really know where the other is standing. Especially Lucretia doesn't really know how
They're flirting.
They're flirting. They're
On
definitely
two different
flirting.
levels.
Yes.
And I think it's very interesting because for Lucretia, Ilithia is most certainly the most impactful relationship, and through the episodes, Lucretia is constantly trying to seduce Ilithia, at least like on a political level, but also in a sort of physical way. Like whenever she's around, they go see the gladiators, and she's like really bigging it up, like, oh, these savages, their smells and their big hot bodies, and then they're kissing, and she's like giving her wine and all that. And in the third episode, there's like a very interesting pointed moment when Ilithia is trying to when Lucretia is trying to lube up Ilithia again by giving her more wine, but she's hungover, essentially working as this sort of metaphor for overplaying their hand. Like when episode 3 comes to a close, the Ludus is sort of humiliated in a way because the patrons, essentially like Ilithia and the senator, and the crowd are very displeased with the outcome of the battle between Crixus and Spartacus, and this like sort of hungoverness becomes like a metaphor for that same exact situation. Like they've played their hand too heavy.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think about the kind of metaphorical aspects of the show to little aspects of the show. I was talking about like the Gladiator as this, maybe this is not the most direct bridge, but forgive me, but talking about the aspect of gladiators as these like pop superstars and things, and it really affects again how these characters relate to each other. Like Spartacus has not bought the idea of gladiators the way the other characters are, which is really affecting their relationships, and it's really affecting kind of the political aspect of the show, like working towards the revolution. At this point, the revolution's not yet possible because like both Oenomaus and Crixus have built their whole identity around this pride around being a gladiator, and that pride, and where they feel like they're special, they feel like they have some sort of a special meaningful position. And during the first season we're going to see how that is chipped away, and how they kind of have to come face to face with the fact that being gladiators does not make them any more free than any other slave or enslaved person, that they are just as still like at the mercy of these people. And that is kind of the journey that has to be taken, and Spartacus has like this instrumental way of showing them and kind of building solidarity, which does not exist yet. Like it's also like when these recruits come and they're new and they're being hazed essentially, and instead of having solidarity for these people, they're being part of they're hazing together, like they're hazing them as well. There's a moment where Barca approaches Spartacus while they're trying to get food after they've had to like carry heavy blocks of wood all night, and he's like, oh, I remember being new and having to do this, you must be super hungry. And then he like turns the pot on the floor and laughs at them. So there really is like this lack of any sort of solidarity and understanding between them, and that is
Asher sort of tries to build a little bit of solidarity by going like, oh, well, at least he didn't piss in it this time. Gives a slightly bad aftertaste.
Yeah, and like that, it's not there, and Spartacus is there, and he has to kind of build it from ground up to really go to the point where they can see that they have this, instead of being these separate people, they have a joint struggle, which I think, again, the show does really well, and it has a really interesting commentary on.
Two very slight little points about the revolution. There are two exceptionally good little foreshadowing lines in these episodes. One of them is when Bariaris is sort of trying to get Spartacus on his side by being like, hey, you could get all of this glory and I could get you your wife back. And he asks, how many men would you kill? 100? 1,000? Like, well, that's a lot more. That's like, it's gonna be a lot more. And then in the second episode, Ilithia is in the second episode, Ilithia is like, what if they all banded together and just kind of jumped you guys? Like, yeah,
wouldn't that be crazy?
What if? What if?
I think that it's true. It's I'm very excited to, again, like, knowing where it's going. I'm excited to see the process of us getting there. One thing I wanted to say that I kind of touched earlier that I do really like about this, again, is the wife guy of it all. Like, Spartacus is absolutely a wife guy. Varro's a wife guy. Crixus becomes a wife guy after meeting his girlfriend.
Bariaris is a wife guy.
Problematic wife guy, nonetheless. Gleiber is kind of a wife guy as well. Like,
yeah,
like we really get this show, especially
Oenomaus used to be a wife guy.
Yes, all of the good characters in the show, especially, kind of mate like geese. Like they have one person that they're with. Like, once they really fall in love, that's it, and they're with that person for life. And I think it's very sweet. Although that brings me to the thing that I don't like, which is the wife plot. The wife plot, just like, I understand why it's there. Like,
for Spartacus.
Yeah, for Spartacus. I understand why it's there. I understand why, from like a narrative point of view, it was more dramatic that she was taken away. Again, like I told you in the first episode, she actually was here at this point in history. Whatever, but I hate the fridge wife trope, and also just the way it's played here is so it does lack that tact that the other plots have. I think the fact that they're like, we sold her to a Syrian slave trader and now they're doing bad things to her, and Spartacus is like, oh no. And I'm like, fuck, come on. And then you have the thigh strap of doom, which is the fact that like she just has this little like kind of like a garter belt for no reason that is like Spartacus ties to her thigh, and then Glauber kind of like taunts him with, and then like Gladiator ends up giving it to him, and then he kind of like holds it as this little like magical item that he wraps around his hand and keeps sniffing. Why is he sniffing it? I hate it so much.
I do have to say that one of the sort of like shakes my fists, spilling beer everywhere moments in the second episode is there's in the sort of initiation of the new gladiators. There's a moment when Spartacus has to go against Crixus, and Crixus absolutely styles on him. And in his hubris, Crixus steps on the pussy scarf of doom, and through the power of love, Spartacus like rips it from under his foot, and that makes Crixus fall, and like
he loses, and Spartacus wins because of the power of the pussy strap.
It is like so stupid, but at the same time, it's just like that sort of like dudes rock hell yeah genre storytelling. I was kind of charmed.
Well, if it wasn't attached to the worst plot about like a female character, perhaps in the whole show, maybe. But I just like I have to find one thing to not like, and it's this one. I don't like this one.
Okay, but how about this?
Yeah.
That gives us maybe the best line in all of these episodes, which is,
"Do I appear a fucking arrow? My nose pointing towards your wife's dripping thighs? You press beyond position."
No. The things they say in this show is like the lines are so unreasonable.
Can we do a couple of the lines?
Yeah,
I love
for sure.
the lines. There's a moment in the second episode where Anamaeus, the sort of tutor of this Ludus,
the doctore.
Yeah, he walks up to Spartacus and pisses on the sand before him.
That's in the third episode.
Oh, sorry, in the third episode. Pisses on the ground before him and calls Thrace a swamp of piss, which prompts Crixus to walk in, and he says,
The sand smells like thrice. Perhaps I should shit to complete the aroma.
It's so unreasonable. Like, there's
this is like rap battle levels of lines. Like, this is so fucking good.
Yeah, there was also, somebody said Jupiter's cock, which is classic Spartacus curse.
Yes. Classic
Spartacus curse. Here I have to give credit to the other Spartacus podcast that exists, which is called Jupiter's Rooster. Hilarious name.
The specific line comes from Anamaeus when he's sort of giving all of the gladiators words to train by, and the line is,
Never lose focus. Not if Jupiter himself were to rip open the heavens and dangle his cock from the skies.
No, that was a different line. Jupiter. The first Jupiter's cock was just kind of like Jupiter's cock, like you know, like an exclamation, and then he also expanded on the metaphor. Thank you, Anamaeus.
We love you, Anamaeus. Big up. Absolutely incredible
There's
line.
also, like, they're talking about the recruits in the second episode, and they're like,
A pile of shit. Not a cock among them.
which is just, again, unreasonable. And
These lines
then
go
Asher,
so hard.
I think that's Asher who says that, and then Crixus says,
Well, then you should join them, you little cunt.
just like, again, establishing that they don't like each other, but why did we have to talk like this? What was the reason?
Okay, maybe I was too early. The best line comes from Gladiator, of course.
You're the best I could do at the moment.
One or two show promise, but the rest my own mother would have them in the arena.
You have no mother. You were belched from the cunt of the underworld. That's why I favor you.
Oh my god. Oh my fucking... You could have a whole line of merch just based on different lines. Like, imagine like a graphic tee, like one of those, you'd get from EMP or something that just goes, I was belched out by the cunt of the underworld.
Yeah,
Mwah.
it's something else for sure. It's just like what I was saying last episode. It's so weird because they want to sound old-timey and also incredibly crass at all times.
Yeah, for
and
sure.
like the combination ends up being like totally crazy.
It's poetry.
I've
It's
never
poetry.
watched like, oh my god, I forget what its name, but there's a lot of like cowboy. I love Western media, like Wild West themed media, and there's a few really gritty cowboy TV series that I have not seen yet, and I wonder if they sound the same, because again, I know that they have a lot of swearing and an old-timey language, so I would love to know, like, watch and compare a little bit. I have to ask my parents what the show was called, because I'm
I
thinking
need
about
that.
a specific one.
I want to talk like these characters. Like I want to walk around dropping lines like this.
Yeah, what was the one?
There's one more I put down.
Yeah.
It's from Varro. And the context of this scene is immediately incredible. After Spartacus did something stupid, I don't remember specifically what, but he was acting like a brat.
Yeah.
So they put them in a shit pit. A literal
I don't think the mud
pit.
shit. Is it mud or shit?
It is shit. It is
Yeah. I
pointedly.
don't think it comes back. Like, I think it's
No.
just an inexplicable, like, mud shit pit that does not, like,
Yeah.
return.
Yeah, and they're just like both Varro and Spartacus are standing there because they're friends.
Yeah.
And they happen to be standing next to each other in this scene. And Spartacus goes,
Your company here was not my intent.
and Varro responds,
Yet here I stand beside you, my cock soaking in the same shit.
amazing. But then Spartacus replies,
Apologies.
Yeah. It's beautiful. And that's what male friendship really is all about.
legitimately, I've well, I haven't been in a shit pit, but I have been
Metaphorically, you have.
I have, yeah, and totally the sort of having to deal with someone else's problem, and sort of not being all that happy about it
Yeah.
does carry that feeling. I've been in a shit pit with a dude, and my dick has been in that same shit.
All right. I think we need to start wrapping this up. But you wanted to talk about the visuals still before
Yes,
we go?
yes. I'm so glad we're ending on this because I have like things I really want to say. So first off, again with the digital backlot stuff, if you didn't watch the previous episode, go check it out.
This is a podcast.
Oh yeah, sure. Yeah, go listen to it. But on the Ludus's grounds, there's an open area where they're doing most of their training, and it's like a liminal Xbox fucking area. Like it looks amazingly, like even when it's filled with people, it looks empty.
Yeah.
And it just randomly stops at a cliff.
Yeah, it's like the Lotus is like pitched on a cliff face, and so there's like one of the back walls is missing. It's just like a drop.
Yeah, amazing. But like in any other show, there would have been like a highlight. But like this show is so good visually speaking. If you're even just slightly on the same wavelength as me, you could get a whole aesthetic Tumblr on each episode. Like on this episode alone, you have Crixus ordering Spartacus to rest, and there's this dramatic scene where there's like a purple smoke that swipes them away.
Yeah.
It looks incredible. There's the sort of weird textures that appear on as vignettes when they're doing flashbacks. You have stuff like the sort of montages, like the training montages. And there's like you have all of them like sort of doing these cutouts, like they're walking around and the environments around them keep changing, and the most amazing little shot in between one of these montages is Animeus whipping the sun into existence because he's so powerful. He's ruling them in a way where he like defines reality.
Yeah.
Like he's that powerful. Then you have the reoccurring sort of visual motifs when it comes to editing. You have a lot of sort of these image within image type of like scene transitions. And we've been watching quite a lot of Criminal Minds recently.
We sure have.
And they do a similar thing. There's also a very famous scene from Saw 4 that does this, where you have a sort of screen, and then you zoom into it.
Yeah.
The Saw one is greater than whatever Criminal Minds is doing.
What Criminal Minds is doing is cute.
Yeah, this is awesome because you have these scenes, especially when they're talking about like Crixus's backstory. You have like these sort of drawings on a wall.
Yeah, so it's not just Crixus, it's Crixus, Barca, and Onomaus, and for all of their backstories, we get like zoom into these like graffiti on a wall, and then we get into this flashback.
Yeah, and they are like again these sort of weird Xbox like era liminal spaces that are very unreal but stylized to high hell. We see this one sort of backstory to a legendary gladiator that's like 3 meters tall and can kill a person by one swipe where all of their limbs get detached. It's just such a powerful little scene. And again, with the match cuts, you have
Sexual violence match cut.
Exactly. Then you have Spartacus rising from a table and like going ham on a motherfucker, essentially.
Yeah.
Like tackling them. It is like there's so many of these like really amazingly stylistic things happening in the show currently. As far as I remember, they sort of tone that down the further they go, but these 2 episodes were like an embarrassment of riches.
Yeah, and there's a really fun, like at the end of the 3rd episode, Crixus and Spartacus are having a gladiatorial combat at the arena, and they're wearing the helmets, and we get these in-helmet shots of their faces when they're fighting, which is like helmet POV, and it's so fascinating. I don't think I've ever really seen anything quite like it before.
But yeah, because it's not like the POV of the character through the helmet. You get a couple of those, but it's like this weird like inside of the helmets looking at the character. It's like essentially like a mecha shot.
Yeah,
Like
yeah, it is. It's a mecha shot. That's
because
true.
they're like sort of like these pilots who are taking damage, and you get to see them like take hits and stuff, but they're unaffected, and you get to see Crixus kind of pilot his body and be in this like delighted enragement. And when it comes to sort of the subtler visual storytelling in these scenes, I noticed a very interesting thing about the helmets, because like the 3rd episode is essentially just Spartacus's downfall. Like his pride gets dashed. He understands that he needs to sort of take this seriously. He needs to train. He needs to build up to become the character he needs to be. Like he's not this God's gift to earth.
He learns humility.
Yeah. And 2 things happening. So when it comes to the helmets, as I mentioned, there's a lot of like Christ imagery that comes with Spartacus. Like he's constantly shown in this sort of divine light. He has long hair, beard. He looks very Jesus-y. And in this scene,
up until they cut his hair off, but yes.
But that's still very interesting to me, because in this scene, like the height before his downfall, he's wearing a helmet that has literal demon like sort of protrusions. They look like demon horns, whereas Crixus is doing the whole mane of a lion, like very heroic looking helmet. So you get this sort of person who's worked up to this position in society versus this person who's given into their pride, like lost sense of who they are, and then they get humiliated. Like it's their bottom. Like it's as bad as they get. And in the same scene, did you notice Crixus' shield?
Doesn't it have the snake on it as well?
It does. It is
Yeah.
the red snake making its comeback.
I think it's a red thing with a yellow snake. Because I
Could
was
be.
just paying
But
paying
it
attention to
comes pretty pointedly
Yeah,
after.
no, it definitely is on purpose.
Yeah, and Spartacus says before that,
May the gods bring you fortune as they did me this morning.
Sura believed in the gods. When the Romans took her, not one descended from the heavens to intervene.
very hard line by itself, but also combined with the sort of snake imagery.
Yes.
Again, in the shield, in a moment where Spartacus gets really like completely owned, essentially.
Yeah.
It is very, very good.
It is. I will say also, a lot of the podcasts that I was listening to were talking about how usually films and TV don't include the helmets because you can't really get like expression shots of characters when they are wearing the helmets. You want them to be recognizable and you want them to be, you want to see how they're feeling about it. And clearly, this proves that you could do it. People are not taking enough like creative risks with their Gladiator media, because this one made it work with them wearing helmets, and you also got the expression shots.
Yeah, it is legitimately incredible shots. Like one of my favorites from all of this. I would like to conclude with maybe the most sort of subtle note of these, because I just really like craft,
Yeah.
And if you were to sit down a film class and you'd want to impress upon them how to deliver information visually, what sort of associations do we have, what can we tell with camera placement alone, these two episodes really make a compelling case for that, because at the end of the second episode, the second episode, when you have the first Crixus versus Spartacus in the Ludus on the sort of inauguration of the new gladiators, you get a good scene where Crixus, after being sort of propped up as this incredible hero, he is shot at a high angle that makes him look very insecure, very small, and then you have those Jesus shots of Spartacus from a down low where he looks very, very powerful, and you get this like very clear sort of power dynamic between them just based on shots alone. And then when you get to the fight, it gets more even, and eventually you get the victory and all that stuff. That's then sort of brought back in the third episode, when you just have these medium shots and these very intense experimental mecha inside the helmet shots and like more general action imagery. Because I feel like it is giving more space for the plot and the intensity to take over, whereas in this shot they're sort of like in the second whoa, our dog just made a loud sound. Anyways, where in the second episode they're like amping it up in the sort of like they're bigging up characters, they're really telling you how you're supposed to feel. I just think it's so nice. It is so nice to actually see people use the camera in this powerful of a way in a series that's not well known for its visual storytelling. Although
really
it should
be.
Yeah, it is great. I legitimately love the beginning of Spartacus as a show. It might be an acquired taste, but if you try, go watch my videos. I'm gonna hype up, like, actually brainwash yourself to liking kind of crummy looking CGI. Watch the episodes 1, 2, and 3 of Spartacus, and you will see something that has not been replicated since, and it is intensely incredible. Like, I don't know. Like, it is.
It's just
one
really
of my,
good, guys.
Yeah, it is one of my favorite openings to a TV show.
Yeah. And I think it does it visually, it does it like script-wise. I think, again, the acting is like astonishingly good. I think the guy who plays Spartacus is just, he brings this like vulnerability to the character also that really sells it. Like, I think there's so many aspects that really come together to make the show into, you know, the thing that it is, to make it work so well. And I feel like if the aesthetics were worse, if the script was worse, if the actors were worse, it would like, you know, it would be a big thing. I think all of those things coming together the way they do is really what makes it work so incredibly well.
And I think what really makes this show worth discussing is the sort of push and pull between those elements and how well it's made to how completely ass it can be sometimes.
Yes, absolutely.
And that's, again, that's why genre storytelling is so important and it's so compelling, because it doesn't have to be great throughout. It can be hairy, it can be complicated, it can be even problematic at times, but I think the problematic aspects of Spartacus are very much a part of the quilt of the experience of the show.
Yeah, and I will say, now that we watched like 3 episodes of it, I have enjoyed them more than I did the first time.
Same.
I think like a lot more even. So it is a show that, part of it that is because there's been time and I know where it's going and I can see the bigger picture, and the other part is that I've also managed to cultivate a taste for this since I watched it the first time. But yeah, I have like newfound appreciation for these aspects, which I already appreciated, but like the more we're working on this, the more I'm finding those parts. But I think that's a pretty good place to call it.
I'd say.
The only thing I want to like say is that if you're interested in the history part of Gladiators, I based like a lot of this on, again, multiple podcasts that I listened to. Same guy who I talked about last time, who does History on Fire. He has 2-parter episode about gladiators and the history of gladiators. Very interesting 2 episodes, not entirely just like historical fact. He also does some commentary that I have opinions on, but this is not the Talk About History on Fire podcast, so I will not share them here, but they're interesting episodes for sure. And then I also listened to the Art of Manliness Gladiator episode, which gave me more of an appreciation for the previous one, because where History on Fire would present things as like, you know, we have this thing but we can't really estimate it, we don't know exactly where it started, and, you know, hedging everything in the uncertainty the way I know real historians do, because there's not, you know, there's very few things we can say for certain. The guy in the other podcast would be like, yes, 50% of all like gladiators were free men, which is like objectively, I already know from the previous one, not true, because that changed severely during like which period we're talking about and everything. But like, they both with a grain of salt, but they were really interesting. And then I also, you know, did some other Googling, but those are the big sources if you're interested.
And as for my part, I would like to sort of expand your horizons. So if you think Spartacus is compelling, but you're finding it difficult to sort of get the vibe, I would highly suggest you watch Vordum, The Price of Death, which is a claymation gladiatorial sort of fantasy-esque movie made by 2 Russian guys in the 2010s, I think. Very similar vibes to Spartacus, so it's like a natural double feature type of situation. But also, I would very highly recommend watching the original Crow. I think there's a lot...
Interesting.
I think there's a parallel between the sort of soft, masculine man that goes through both of these movies. And both of them have incredible lines, so... Yeah. I would imagine you could get something out of them.
That's an interesting comparison, but I feel like it works.
Yeah. But alright, I think that's it for this. And we'll see you...
Catch you on the next one.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.